By 10 years old, we've already achieved some great things. We've mastered skills, absorbed information, and grown to an average height of 4.5 feet. But now we're setting out to show the incredible transformations that our bodies must undergo, taking them from the age of 10 to 50. And this leg of the race is all about the battle of the sexes. It all begins when our brain triggers a tiny mechanism no larger than a pea, called the pituitary gland. This miniature organ brings about the greatest upheaval our bodies will ever experience: puberty, transforming us into adults. And it does this by switching on some incredibly powerful chemicals, our sex hormones.
They're not visible. That's the problem with hormones. You cannot see them, you cannot touch them. But what we need to understand is that without hormones, we don't really exist.
Hormones are our chief administrators. They are constantly patrolling the body, checking and regulating every function.
Hormones are actually agents of change in the body. They affect the way we think, they affect the way we look, the way we interact with each other, and certainly the way our lives unfold.
And when our 3 sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, are switched on, hold on to your seats, because things are about to get a whole lot more interesting.
Puberty is the time when we go from being children, asexual, to sexual human beings, which is very important because if we don't make that transition, our species would die out very quickly.
But what about the boys? Well, they too are about to undergo an alarming makeover. And when their testosterone is increased by 30 times, it's safe to say that all bets are off. It's often said that boys like action. But one thing's for certain. When their testosterone hormone kicks into gear, they're in for a hell of a ride.
Suddenly, the pituitary gland is sending messages and saying, wake up, testes, start making testosterone.
And they do. In fact, a maturing boy's testosterone levels can rise by 30 times. This is a strong mix, but testosterone is such a powerful chemical that the amount of it in a boy's body is minuscule. Its concentration would be the equivalent of dissolving a single grain of salt into 60 pints of water. And if you add up the amount of testosterone inside every man on Earth, you would only end up with this amount, 76 pounds worth.
The real surge of male hormones occurs around the age of 13 or 14, which sends boys off on a completely different route from girls.
Will and John are 16 years old, and testosterone has been busy transforming their bodies for over 2 years now. For boys, the first signs of puberty are the testicles growing bigger. And they grow from 1.5 cubic centimeters to 20 cubic centimeters. That's 13 times larger. Then, a boy's penis starts growing, and by the age of 18, reaches an average length of 6.5 inches. But not long before then, boys have already begun setting up sperm-making factories, each producing 300 million sperm a day. In less than a month, a boy will have created more sperm than there are people on the planet. In their lifetimes, Will and John will each create enough sperm to populate this many planet Earths. 571 of them. But they're never going to achieve this unless they're able to fire them. And to do that, they need an erection. The average male has several each day, and while sleeping at night. And he has an average of 7,700 ejaculations in his lifetime. But the question is, exactly how much semen does this add up to?
Perhaps a liter or two of semen.
2 gallons.
I'll say 3.5 gallons.
50 gallons?
60 gallons. I'll just say a pool's worth of semen.
A few Olympic swimming pools.
An ocean.
An ocean.
It may come as a disappointment to some, but in his lifetime, a man will have spent around 7 gallons of semen. But that's not the only thing teenage boys produce during puberty. They also start growing hair everywhere. Teenage boys like Carl here start growing hair in the pubic area, armpits, arms, chest, abdomen, and even the back. Hair will also appear on the face, growing out of 30,000 follicles. That means a boy throughout puberty could be sprouting up to 30 new hairs a day. Just imagine the amount of stubble Carl will have to remove en route to his 50th birthday. 30,000 hairs each day, each growing 0.4 of a millimeter. In fact, Carl better get used to shaving, because by the time he's 50, he will have dragged his razor blade over an area this big, about 383 square yards. Unless, of course, he doesn't want to bother with shaving, in which case he could cultivate the same style as Nicholas Gascoigne here. Beards are the fastest growing hair on the body. If Nicholas never trimmed his beard, it could grow up to 30 feet long. If every man in the world did this, then it would be possible to weave a rope from their beards 30,000 strands thick and long enough to wrap around the planet 775 times. But when it comes to the pros and cons of excess hair, not everyone is in agreement.
I
do not find hairy men sexy.
Sexy. Depends on where the hair is.
On their back, no. On their chest is okay.
Well, if they're all hairy on the chest, no.
Off-putting.
I find hairy men sexy.
But sexy or not, hair is only a tiny part of a teenage boy's rapid transformation. His body changes so fast, he can become hard to recognize, as his jaw, brow, chin, and nose quickly morph from one look to another. And when it comes to raw growth, he'll outperform his female counterparts. From the start of puberty, a boy will grow about a full foot taller. Imagine how many pairs of jeans we'd go through if puberty lasted for 10 years. Most men would end up over 8 feet tall. But it's not just about the legs and torso. All over his body, a teenage boy is growing. His feet take the lead as they jump through the shoe sizes. Then his hands follow. And bones aren't the only thing gaining length. His vocal cords become 60% longer and also wider. They now vibrate at a lower frequency, making his voice drop in pitch by a whole octave. It's a bit like converting this cello into a double bass. But there's another change awaiting any teenage boy, and it's not so welcome. Sweat. Hormones alter his perspiration, resulting in a more adult-smelling body odor. And under full exertion, he can fill a six-pack with sweat in just 1 hour. But he doesn't need to be in the gym to work up a bit of a stink. In fact, a boy's odor can appear at the most unwelcome times, especially when he senses fear, like right before a big event. His adrenaline hormone kicks in, and so do his sweat glands.
An adrenaline burst, which will cause sweaty palms, racing heart, faster breathing. So we get a little bit tongue-tied, perhaps, and show indications of stage fright.
But a boy's odor isn't the only thing that gets stronger. By 18, Carl here will have 50% more muscle and 50% less fat than a girl of the same age. These cans of spinach represent the weight of muscle a boy will develop during the course of his adolescence. That's 14 rippling pounds of it. But a boy rarely becomes quite the he-man he hopes, and his hormones often assail him in ways that are not at all welcome.
What things upset me is acne.
Well, you're never satisfied. When your body's constantly changing shape, you're never satisfied with it.
I was way too thin. It was really tough to, I was running around a lot, so it was really tough for me to put on weight.
But it's not just a boy's body that makes him different from a girl. He tends to develop the right side of his brain faster, resulting in what some experts believe are more attuned visual and spatial skills. In contrast, girls tend to develop the left side of their brain faster, leading to better communication skills. The age-old debate is whether these differences and others are because of our brains or our cultural conditioning.
I imagine a good deal of it has to do with nurture and culture and environment. At least I thought that until I had both boys and girls, and now I know that even if you rear them the same way, there are differences.
Contrary to what some may believe, girls don't talk more than boys. They both speak the same number of words a day, about 16,000 of them. But some studies indicate that women tend to be more articulate, using a wider vocabulary. Boys, on the other hand, have been shown to speak slower and in shorter sentences. It's hardly surprising, as testosterone can make teenage boys restless, giving them a short attention span and increased aggression. Odessa is 12, and for her, this transformation into puberty is already underway. One of the first things hormones will do is make her grow faster than at any other time in her life.
About the time of puberty, there is an enormous rush in terms of bone growth. We get a huge increase in the length of our bones. So this is our sort of shooting up phase.
In just 1 year, Odessa will grow as much as 3.5 inches, about the size of this heel. By the end of puberty, she will have grown a whopping 9.8 inches, which would be the equivalent of donning a pair of swanky platforms this big. And Odessa's body fat will increase by even more, 120%. During her peak weight gain, she can put on 1.5 pounds a month. That's the weight of 3 packs of butter, like this. And over a year, this would come to 18.3 pounds, enough to spread over 1,600 slices of bread. Yet the amount of hormones needed to bring about a change in our bodies is 100 times smaller than a single grain of sand. Imagine making a dose of hormones for every girl on Earth. Amazingly, you would only need a pile this big, about 7.5 pounds worth. But hormones don't just make us bigger. They literally transform us into adults.
The girl starts growing breasts. She starts getting hair in her pubis and in her armpits. She starts thinking differently. She gets her period and she starts becoming a woman, meaning she starts ovulating and she starts being ready to reproduce.
At 12 years old, Odessa's ovaries already contain 300,000 egg cells. And now, one of them will be released each month. The egg can develop into an embryo if it's fertilized. If not, it's replaced by another the next month. In her lifetime, a woman will release about 400 eggs. But there's more to this roller coaster ride than physical transformations. By the time a girl reaches 15, like Frankie here, her hormones have begun to affect dramatically the way she sees the world. And that, combined with her changing body, can open up a whole new frontier of priorities.
They're trying to override what their body, their hormones are saying in order to fit in. Perfect example would be young girls developing anorexia and bulimia, because they're afraid to move on to the new body.
This is probably the most extreme reaction there is, but the developing woman has a great deal to contend with. She'll sprout hair where she doesn't want it, and her skin becomes oilier. It can be a traumatic time, and many never forget it.
One day I could look in the mirror and be like, wow, like I look really fit, like I look really good. And then the next day you look in the mirror and you're like, what the hell happened?
Just the awkwardness that you have like during puberty and stuff.
Getting really big hips really quickly. Never having clothes that fit well. Pimples are the worst. They change and they come at the worst of times.
Some teenage girls experience fatigue, mood swings, and irritability, which can lead to tears. A lot of tears. Up to the age of 12, boys and girls cry about the same amount. But then, as a girl's hormones flood in, she begins to cry more. And by the age of 18, girls are crying 4 times more than boys. Not surprisingly, we cry most when we're sad. 49% of our tears. And 10% when we are angry. But 7% of our tears are out of sympathy. 5% from anxiety. 4% from fear. And the good news, 21% out of happiness. Of course, tears are a small price to pay for the myriad of changes that await a teenage girl as she moves into womanhood.